They say genius always finds a way to be seen. But some geniuses are born where no one is looking. Every afternoon, just before sunset, a homeless boy stood outside one of America's most elite schools and taught a billionaire's son how to think. What happened next didn't just change one life. It rewrote the meaning of wealth. Stay with me, because this is not a story about charity. It's a story about recognition. Who was this boy, and how did he know what even elite tutors could not teach? Why was he living under a bridge with a brother slowly dying? And what kind of man sees brilliance in rags and chooses not to look away? This story asks a dangerous question. What if talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not? What if the next person who could change the world is standing right in front of you, invisible? Caleb was 14, but life had already aged him. His hands were calloused from carrying water jugs. His eyes carried the weight of decisions no child should make. By day, he scavenged for food, for blankets, for anything that could keep his older brother alive one more night. By night, he studied, not because anyone asked him to, but because his mind refused to sleep. Caleb remembered everything he read. Words stayed with him like old friends who never left. He found books in dumpsters behind bookstores, pages torn and stained, but to him, they were treasures. Mathematics, physics, computer science. He devoured them all. Under a bridge in Seattle, beneath layers of cardboard and torn tarps, Caleb had built a small library. Plastic bags protected his books from the rain. A battery-powered lantern, stolen from a construction site, gave him light after dark. This was his university. This was his escape. But escape was a luxury he could rarely afford, because Morgan needed him. Morgan was 2 years older, but illness had made him frail. A chronic respiratory condition that worsened every winter. Every cough sounded like breaking glass. Every shallow breath was a reminder that time was running out. Caleb had learned early that the world didn't care about kids like them. They had slipped through every crack in the system. Their mother had died when Caleb was 9. Their father, already broken by addiction, disappeared 6 months later. Foster care had been worse than the streets. So they ran. And they survived. Barely. Morgan once told Caleb he was the smartest person he'd ever known. Caleb had laughed bitterly. What good is smart when you're invisible? But something inside him refused to give up. Every page he turned was a silent prayer that someday, somehow, knowledge might save them both. Across the city, in a world that might as well have been on another planet, Leo Sterling sat in his bedroom staring at a laptop screen. The assignment was simple: write a basic algorithm that sorted numbers. But nothing about it felt simple to Leo. His private tutor had explained it 3 times. His father had hired another specialist. Nothing worked. The concept slipped through his mind like water through fingers. Leo wasn't stupid. He knew that. But he was starting to believe he was broken. Around him, everything was perfect. The estate sprawled across 5 acres. His room was bigger than most apartments. He had access to every resource money could buy. But he couldn't understand a simple coding loop, and it was eating him alive. Arthur Sterling, Leo's father, had built his empire from algorithms. He'd started as a programmer and scaled his company into a tech giant worth billions. He loved his son fiercely, but he didn't understand him. How could his own child, with every advantage, struggle with something that had come so naturally to him? Arthur hired the best tutors. He bought the latest educational software. Nothing seemed to help. And worse, he could see the frustration building in Leo's eyes. The shame. Arthur knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror once, many years ago, before he'd found his way. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. Sterling Academy sat on a hill overlooking the city, wrapped in stone walls and iron gates. It was where Seattle's elite sent their children, where senators' daughters walked the same halls as tech heirs. Leo attended because it was expected. He performed well enough in most subjects, but coding, the one thing his father cared about most, remained a mystery. Every afternoon, Leo's driver picked him up at exactly 3:15. The routine never changed. Until the day Leo heard a voice from beyond the fence. It was late September, and Leo had stayed after school, sitting on a bench near the back gate, dreading another tutoring session. That's when he heard someone talking about recursive functions. The voice was young, passionate, explaining concepts with a clarity Leo had never encountered. He walked toward the fence and saw him. A boy about his age, maybe younger, dressed in clothes that had seen better years. His sneakers were held together with duct tape. His jacket was too thin for the cooling weather. But his eyes were alive. burning with an intensity that made Leo forget everything else. The boy was talking to himself, working through a problem out loud, using a stick to draw diagrams in the dirt. Leo stood frozen, listening. For the first time in months, the fog in his mind began to clear. The boy explained algorithms like they were stories. Loops became journeys. Variables became characters. Suddenly, it made sense. Caleb noticed Leo watching him and stopped mid-sentence. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Leo said, "Don't stop. Please." I was actually understanding it. Caleb looked at the expensive uniform, the clean face, the watch that probably cost more than a year's worth of meals. He should have walked away. Rich kids were trouble. But something in Leo's expression stopped him. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was hunger. The same hunger Caleb felt every time he opened a book. So Caleb kept talking, and Leo kept listening. That afternoon marked the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. Every day after that, Leo found reasons to stay late. He'd tell his driver he had study group or extra practice. Then he'd go to the back fence where Caleb waited. Caleb never asked for money, never asked for anything. He just taught, and Leo learned. Within 2 weeks, Leo's coding assignments went from failing to exceptional. His tutor was baffled. His teachers were impressed. But Leo said nothing about the boy behind the fence. He knew instinctively that this was fragile, that the adult world would ruin it if they knew. So he protected the secret like it was sacred. But Arthur Sterling trusted data more than words. And the data didn't add up. His son, who'd struggled for months, was suddenly excelling. The transformation was too dramatic, too sudden. Arthur wasn't angry. He was curious. One afternoon in mid-October, he told his assistant to clear his schedule. He drove to Sterling Academy himself, parked down the street, and watched. He saw Leo walk toward the back fence, saw him sit in the grass. And then Arthur saw him, the boy in torn clothes, holding a battered textbook, teaching his son with a passion that belonged in university lecture halls, not on city streets. Arthur sat in his car for 20 minutes, just watching, listening. The boy was explaining data structures with a depth that startled him. This wasn't memorization. This was mastery. When the session ended and Leo left, Arthur got out of his car. He walked to the fence. Caleb was packing his books into a garbage bag when he noticed the man in the expensive suit staring at him. Caleb's first instinct was to run. Men like that meant police, social services, trouble. But something in the man's expression held him there. Arthur spoke first. "How long have you been teaching, my son?" Caleb's heart hammered. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." He asked questions. "I just answered." Arthur nodded slowly. "I'm not angry. I'm grateful. And I'm curious. Where did you learn to teach like that?" Caleb hesitated. Every survival instinct screamed not to trust this man. But he was tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of pretending he didn't exist. So he told the truth. "Books. I teach myself. I remember what I read." Arthur asked the question that had been burning in his mind since he started watching. "Why aren't you in school?" The question hung in the cold air. Caleb almost laughed. "You need an address to enroll in school. You need guardians. You need proof you exist. I don't have any of that." Arthur's expression shifted. "Where do you live?" Caleb looked away. "Under the bridge on 5th. With my brother." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was crushing. Arthur felt something crack open inside his chest. He'd assumed homelessness was about bad choices, about people who'd given up. But this boy hadn't given up. He'd fought for knowledge with nothing but will. Arthur asked, "What's your name?" Caleb met his eyes. "Caleb. And before you offer me money or food, I don't need charity. I just needed something to do while I waited for the library to open." Arthur smiled, but it was sad. What if I'm not offering charity? What if I'm offering a chance? Caleb had heard promises before. They always came with strings. A chance at what? Arthur thought carefully before answering. A chance to be seen. Really seen. Not as a problem to fix, but as a person with potential. Caleb wanted to believe him. But belief was dangerous. It hurt more when it was taken away. "Why would you care?" Arthur's answer was honest. "Because my son was drowning, and you pulled him out. Because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted. And because I was you once. Not homeless, but invisible. And someone gave me a chance. I owe that forward. Before we go further, I need to know something. Where are you watching this from right now? Are you somewhere warm and safe? Or are you fighting battles no one sees? Drop a comment and let us know what part of the world you're tuning in from. And if this story is hitting different than the usual content you scroll past, do me a favor. Click that subscribe button. Not for me, but for you. Because we're building something here. A place where real stories matter. Where depth beats distraction. You won't regret it. Now, let's get back to Caleb, because what happened next will break you. Caleb didn't trust easily. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But Arthur was persistent in a way that felt different from the social workers who'd tried to save him before. Arthur didn't show up with clipboards and condescending smiles. He showed up with questions. Real questions. About what Caleb was reading. About how he taught himself advanced mathematics. About what he wanted to learn next. Over the next week, Arthur came back to that fence every afternoon. Sometimes he brought food, sandwiches from a local deli, still warm. Caleb accepted them, but only because Morgan needed to eat. Pride was expensive, and Caleb had learned to swallow it when necessary. Arthur learned more about Caleb's life in those conversations than he'd learned about most people in years. Caleb talked about Morgan's condition, how the cold made it worse, how he tried to get his brother into free clinics, but without insurance or identification, they were always turned away. How he'd stolen cough medicine more times than he could count. How every winter, he feared Morgan wouldn't make it to spring. Arthur listened without interrupting, without offering easy solutions. He knew that what Caleb needed most wasn't advice. It was to be heard, to matter. After the fifth conversation, Arthur made an offer. Let me help your brother. Get him medical care. Real care. Caleb's walls went up immediately. We're not a charity case. Arthur shook his head. You're right. You're not. But Morgan is sick, and you're carrying a weight no 14-year-old should carry. Let me lift some of it. Not because you owe me. Not because I want something. But because it's right. Caleb stared at him, searching for the catch. There was always a catch. And what happens after? They take him away? Put us in different homes? I've seen how that story ends. Arthur's voice was gentle but firm. I won't let that happen. You have my word. Caleb wanted to scream that words meant nothing. But something in Arthur's eyes made him hesitate. This man wasn't performing kindness. He meant it. That night, Caleb told Morgan about Arthur. They sat under the bridge, wrapped in donated blankets, watching cars pass overhead. Morgan was weaker than usual, his breathing labored. Do you trust him? Morgan asked between coughs. Caleb didn't answer right away. I don't know, but you're getting worse. And I don't know what else to do. Morgan reached out and squeezed his brother's hand. Then let him help. If it goes bad, we run. We've done it before. Caleb nodded, but fear sat heavy in his stomach. What if this was a mistake? What if letting someone in was the thing that finally broke them? 3 days later, Arthur arranged for a private doctor to examine Morgan. Not at a hospital where questions would be asked, but at Arthur's estate. Caleb was terrified walking through those gates. The mansion looked like something from a movie. Marble floors, chandeliers, walls lined with art worth more than entire neighborhoods. Leo was there, waiting nervously. He'd finally learned the truth about who'd been teaching him. When Leo saw Caleb, he smiled. You didn't tell me you were some kind of genius. Caleb shrugged. You didn't ask. The moment was light, but Caleb's heart was pounding. He kept expecting someone to tell them they didn't belong there. The doctor spent an hour examining Morgan, running tests, listening to his lungs, asking questions. When he finished, he sat down with Caleb and Arthur. Your brother has chronic asthma, complicated by repeated respiratory infections. It's serious, but it's treatable. He needs medication, a clean environment, proper nutrition. Caleb felt the words like a punch. Treatable. The doctor nodded. With the right care, he can live a completely normal life. But he needs consistency. He needs to be out of the cold, away from mold and pollutants. Caleb's hands shook. Morgan's condition wasn't a death sentence. It never had been. The only thing killing his brother was poverty. Arthur saw the realization hit Caleb and watched the boy crumble. Not with relief, but with rage. Caleb stood abruptly, fists clenched. So you're telling me he's been suffering for years, and all he needed was medicine? Medicine that exists? That people use every day? His voice cracked. We didn't need a miracle. We just needed someone to care enough to help. Arthur didn't try to calm him down or offer empty comfort. He let Caleb be angry, because the anger was justified. It was the anger of every person who'd been invisible, every talent wasted, every life cut short not by fate, but by indifference. When Caleb finally sat down again, exhausted, Arthur spoke quietly. You're right. The system failed you. I failed you by not seeing sooner. But I see you now. And I'm asking, let me help make this right. Caleb looked at Morgan, who was watching him with tired, hopeful eyes. Then he looked back at Arthur. What do you want from us? Arthur's answer was immediate. Nothing. But I'd like to offer you something. A place to stay. Not as charity. As an opportunity. You teach Leo. You continue your own studies. And Morgan gets the care he needs. You don't owe me anything but honesty and effort. It sounded too good to be true. Caleb's instinct was to say no, to protect himself from inevitable disappointment. But Morgan's labored breathing echoed in the quiet room. Pride couldn't keep his brother alive. Caleb swallowed hard and nodded. Okay, but if this goes wrong, we leave. No questions. Arthur extended his hand. Deal. The first week living on Arthur's estate was the strangest of Caleb's life. They were given a guest house, small but warm, with real beds and a bathroom that had hot water. Morgan started medication immediately, and within days, his breathing improved. Caleb couldn't sleep the first few nights. He kept waiting for someone to burst in and tell them it was all a mistake, that they didn't belong. But morning after morning, he woke up warm and safe. It felt like a dream he was terrified to wake from. Arthur didn't hover. He gave them space, but checked in daily. He asked Caleb what he wanted to learn, then provided books, resources, access to online courses. For the first time in his life, Caleb had everything he needed to let his mind run free. But not everything was easy. Leo's tutors were baffled when Arthur suggested Caleb join some of Leo's sessions. One of them, a Yale graduate named Mr. Peterson, was openly skeptical. With all due respect, Mr. Sterling, this boy has no formal education. He'll struggle to keep up with our curriculum. Arthur's response was calm but firm. Test him. Then we'll talk. Mr. Peterson designed a diagnostic test, expecting Caleb to fail. Instead, Caleb scored higher than any student he'd ever taught. The tutor stared at the results in disbelief. This is impossible. He couldn't have done this without help. Caleb, who'd stayed quiet until then, met the man's eyes. You're right. I did have help. Every book I could find. Every concept I stayed up all night to understand. That was my help. The tension was real. Some people in Arthur's circle thought he was being reckless. Bringing in a homeless kid with no background check, no references. What if it was a scam? What if the boy was dangerous? But Arthur saw what they didn't. He saw hunger for knowledge that couldn't be faked. He saw someone who'd survived impossible circumstances and still chose to learn rather than give up. And most importantly, he saw results. Leo was thriving, not just in coding, but in confidence. Having Caleb around gave him a peer who understood struggle, who made learning feel like discovery instead of obligation. 2 months passed. Morgan's health continued to improve. The color returned to his face. He started gaining weight. The cough that had haunted their nights faded. Caleb watched his brother come back to life and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope was fragile. One evening in early December, Arthur called Caleb into his office. The mood was serious. Caleb's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment it all came crashing down. Arthur gestured for him to sit. I need to talk to you about your future. Caleb braced himself. We're leaving, aren't we? Arthur looked confused. What? No. The opposite. I want to make this permanent. Enroll you in school. Officially. But to do that, we need to deal with legalities. Guardianship. Documentation. I want to do this right, but I need your permission. Caleb stared at him. You want to be our guardian? Arthur nodded. If you'll let me. I'm not trying to replace anyone, but I can give you stability, protection, a future, both of you. Caleb felt his throat tighten. Why? Why do all this? Arthur leaned back, his expression distant, like he was looking at something far away. When I was 16, I was homeless too. Not for long, but long enough to know what it feels like to be invisible. A teacher found me sleeping in the computer lab and didn't report me. Instead, he gave me a job, helping him grade papers, cleaning the lab. It wasn't much, but it kept me fed and gave me access to the computers. That man changed my life. He's gone now, but I made a promise at his funeral. I'd do for someone else what he did for me. I'd see someone when the world looked away. The revelation hit Caleb hard. Arthur had never mentioned this. Never played the I understand card. He'd just acted. Caleb realized then that this wasn't about pity. It was about recognition. Arthur saw himself in Caleb. Saw a kid who refused to let circumstances kill his potential. Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not worth the investment? Arthur smiled sadly. Caleb, you've been teaching college-level concepts to my son with resources most people throw away. You kept your brother alive when the entire system abandoned you. You've already proven your worth. Now let someone invest in you. Let yourself be worth it. That night, Caleb told Morgan everything. His brother listened quietly, then hugged him tight. "We're going to be okay," Morgan said. "For the first time, I actually believe it." Caleb wanted to believe it too, but a part of him still waited for the other shoe to drop. Good things didn't happen to kids like them. But maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The paperwork took weeks. Background checks. Court hearings. Arthur hired the best lawyers, and by late January, it was official. Arthur Sterling became the legal guardian of Caleb and Morgan. The judge had been skeptical at first, questioning Arthur's motives. But after speaking with both boys, after seeing Morgan's medical records and Caleb's test scores, she approved it. Caleb remembered the moment the gavel came down. It felt surreal. They had a home. Legally. Permanently. That night, Arthur took them out to dinner. Not somewhere extravagant, but a small family diner Caleb had once stolen food from. Caleb insisted on going back to apologize and pay for what he'd taken. The owner, an older woman named Donna, remembered him. When she learned what had happened, she teared up and refused to accept payment. "You survived, sweetheart. That's payment enough." Caleb started at Sterling Academy in February. The transition was brutal. He was ahead in some subjects and painfully behind in others. He'd never taken a formal English class, never studied history in a classroom. Social dynamics were a minefield. Most students came from wealth, and they knew how to spot an outsider. Whispers followed Caleb through the halls. "That's the homeless kid Sterling took in. Charity case. But he's gone by summer." Caleb heard it all. Some days, he wanted to quit, to prove them right. But then he'd remember Morgan. Remember the bridge. Remember what it felt like to be invisible. He'd fought too hard to give up now. Leo became his anchor. Unlike the others, Leo didn't treat Caleb like a project or a curiosity. They were friends. Real friends. They studied together, argued about algorithms, laughed at inside jokes. Slowly, others started to notice that Caleb wasn't just smart. He was exceptional. In March, the school held a regional coding competition. Caleb wasn't going to enter. He didn't want the attention, but Leo convinced him. "You're better than all of us. Stop hiding." So Caleb entered. And he didn't just win. He shattered records. His solution was so elegant that the judges asked permission to use it in future teaching materials. Suddenly, the whispers changed. "Did you hear? That kid beat MIT students. He's actually brilliant." But the real twist came in April. Arthur had been working on something in secret, something he hadn't told Caleb. One Saturday morning, he asked Caleb to take a drive with him. They ended up at a building downtown, an old renovated warehouse. Arthur led him inside. The space was filled with computers, desks, whiteboards. "What is this?" Caleb asked. Arthur smiled. "It's yours." "Well, ours. I'm starting a program. A scholarship and mentorship initiative for kids like you. Kids with talent, but no access. I want you to help me build it. Design the curriculum. Help identify candidates. Teach, if you want. I'm calling it the Second Chance Initiative. What do you think?" Caleb was speechless. This wasn't just about him anymore. Arthur was creating a system to find and nurture invisible talent across the city. Kids living under bridges. In shelters. In cars. Kids the world had written off. "You want me to help run this?" Arthur nodded. "You know what they need because you've lived it. I have resources, but you have insight. Together, we can change lives. What do you say?" Caleb looked around the space, imagining it filled with kids like he used to be. Kids who just needed someone to see them. His voice shook when he answered. "Yes. Absolutely yes." The first cohort started that summer. 15 kids. All homeless or in unstable housing. All with aptitude, but no opportunity. Caleb was terrified the first day he stood in front of them. What if he couldn't reach them? What if he wasn't good enough? But then he looked at their faces and saw himself. Hungry. Skeptical. Hopeful. He started with the truth. "I know you don't trust this. I wouldn't either. 6 months ago, I was living under a bridge, teaching myself from stolen books. I'm not here to save you. I'm here because someone saw me, and it changed everything. Now I want to see you. All of you. Let's figure this out together." The room was silent. Then one girl, maybe 13, with clothes too big for her frame, raised her hand. "What if we fail?" Caleb smiled. "Then we fail together and try again. Failure's not the enemy. Invisibility is." That summer became the most transformative of Caleb's life. Teaching those kids gave him purpose beyond survival. He watched them grow, ask questions, challenge assumptions. Some struggled. Some excelled. All of them mattered. And for the first time, Caleb understood what Arthur had given him. Not just safety or education, but the chance to matter, to contribute, to be more than a victim of circumstances. By August, Morgan was healthier than he'd been in years. He'd started community college classes, studying graphic design. He was quiet about it, but Caleb saw the spark in his eyes. The same spark Caleb felt when he solved a hard problem. They'd both been given a second life. One night, the brothers sat on the porch of the guest house, watching the sunset. "You know what's weird?" Morgan said. "I don't miss the bridge." Caleb laughed. "That's not weird. That's called sanity." Morgan shook his head. "No, I don't miss it, but I'm glad it happened. We wouldn't be here if we hadn't gone through that. We wouldn't be us." Caleb thought about that. He'd spent so long angry at the unfairness of their past. But Morgan was right. The struggle had forged something in them. Resilience. Empathy. A refusal to waste the opportunities they now had. "Yeah," Caleb said quietly. "I guess suffering isn't meaningless if you let it teach you something." They sat in comfortable silence. Two brothers who'd survived the unthinkable and come out the other side not broken, but stronger. A year after that first conversation at the fence, Sterling Academy held an assembly. Arthur had been invited to speak about the Second Chance Initiative, which had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Media outlets had covered it. Other wealthy families were contributing, but Arthur insisted Caleb speak too. Caleb stood backstage, heart pounding. Public speaking terrified him more than coding competitions. But Leo was there, grinning. "Just tell them the truth. That's all they need." When Caleb walked onto the stage and saw hundreds of students staring at him, he almost turned back. Then he saw the kids from the program sitting in the front row. His kids. And the fear evaporated. "Most of you don't know what it's like to be invisible," Caleb began. "To walk past people every day and have them look through you like you're glass. I do. For most of my life, I was a problem society didn't want to solve. Too complicated. Too expensive. Easier to ignore. I taught myself advanced math and computer science under a bridge because it was the only thing I could control. Knowledge couldn't be taken from me. It couldn't be stolen or lost. It was mine. But knowledge without opportunity is just a beautiful prison. You know things, but you can't do anything with them." That's where I was. Until one person looked at me and didn't see a homeless kid. He saw potential. Caleb paused, emotion catching in his throat. Arthur Sterling didn't save me. He recognized me. There's a difference. Saving someone is about you feeling good. Recognition is about seeing who they already are and giving them room to become more. Every kid in the Second Chance program is brilliant. They don't need saving. They need to be seen. They need access. They need someone to believe that talent isn't a luxury reserved for people born into the right zip codes. So here's my challenge to everyone in this room. Stop looking past people. The next genius, the next person who will cure cancer or code the program that changes everything, might be standing outside your fence right now. Will you walk past them, or will you open the gate? The applause started slowly, then built. But Caleb wasn't focused on that. He was looking at Arthur, who stood at the side of the stage, tears streaming down his face. After the assembly, students approached Caleb. Some apologized for how they'd treated him. Others asked how they could help with the program. A few admitted they'd struggled too, in ways no one saw. Wealth didn't immunize anyone from feeling invisible. By the end of the day, a dozen students had signed up to volunteer as tutors. The ripple effect had begun. That spring, Caleb graduated early from Sterling Academy with a full scholarship to MIT. He deferred for a year to keep working with the program, to make sure the foundation was solid. Morgan was thriving, his artwork gaining attention online. Arthur officially adopted both boys. Not because he needed to, but because they'd become family. The legal paperwork was just catching up to the emotional reality. They were a family forged not by blood, but by choice and mutual respect. On the day the adoption was finalized, Arthur gave each of them a gift. For Morgan, a professional drawing tablet. For Caleb, a first edition of a computer science textbook he'd once mentioned wanting. Inside the cover, Arthur had written, "For the boy who taught my son to think and taught me to see. You were never invisible. The world was just blind. Thank you for opening my eyes." Caleb read those words and realized something profound. He'd spent so long believing he needed to prove his worth, to earn the right to be seen. But worth wasn't something you earned. It was inherent. Every person had it, whether the world acknowledged it or not. Arthur hadn't given him value. He'd simply refused to ignore the value that was already there. That realization changed everything. Caleb stopped performing, stopped trying to be grateful enough, smart enough, good enough. He just was. And that was enough. The Second Chance initiative expanded to 3 more cities over the next 2 years. Hundreds of kids were given opportunities. Some became engineers. Some became artists. Some became teachers who would one day recognize other invisible kids. The program didn't have a perfect success rate. Some kids weren't ready. Some fell back into old patterns. But enough succeeded that the model proved itself. Talent was everywhere. Opportunity was not. And when you bridged that gap, extraordinary things happened. 5 years after that first conversation at the fence, Caleb stood in front of a different audience. This time, a TED Talk stage. He was 19, a junior at MIT, and the youngest person ever invited to speak at the main conference. His topic, the economics of invisibility. He talked about how much talent the world wasted by ignoring people without pedigree, how innovation suffered when only the privileged had access to resources, how much it cost society, in both human and economic terms, to let brilliance rot on the streets. The talk went viral. 10 million views in the first week. Job offers poured in. Investment firms wanted him. Tech giants offered him positions. But Caleb turned them all down. He had other plans. With Arthur's mentorship and backing, Caleb launched his own company at 20. Not a typical startup, but a social enterprise that connected underserved talent with companies desperate for innovation. He built an algorithm that identified aptitude in unconventional places. Street kids who coded on library computers. Foster youth who taught themselves engineering from YouTube. His platform gave them portfolios, references, pathways to employment. Within 2 years, it placed over 1,000 people in jobs. The company was profitable, but that wasn't the point. The point was proving that the world was overlooking its greatest resource, people it had deemed worthless. Morgan became a successful illustrator. His work featured in galleries and publications. He never forgot where he came from. A portion of every sale went to youth homelessness programs. The brothers stayed close, their bond deepened by shared survival. They had family dinners with Arthur every Sunday, talked about business, art, life, argued about politics, and laughed at old memories. The bridge was far behind them, but they never pretended it hadn't existed. It was part of their story, the part that made everything else mean something. Leo and Caleb remained best friends. Leo went into sustainable tech, using his family's resources to fund green energy projects. He always credited Caleb with teaching him that intelligence wasn't about memorization, but about seeing patterns and asking better questions. The two of them collaborated on projects, combined their networks, pushed each other to think bigger. Their friendship, born at a fence between 2 worlds, became a bridge that others could cross. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. If you had been Arthur that day, would you have stopped? Or would you have kept driving, assuming someone else would help? It's easy to say you'd stop. But how many times have you walked past someone who needed recognition and convinced yourself it wasn't your responsibility? I'm not asking that to shame you. I'm asking because this story only matters if it changes how we see the world. Caleb wasn't special because he was smarter than everyone else. He was special because someone chose to see him. How many Calebs are around you right now, invisible? Drop a comment and tell me. Where do you think brilliance is hiding in your city, in your life, in the places you walk past every day? And be honest, have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever had someone recognize you when everyone else looked away? Share your story. This community is built on real conversation, not just passive watching. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's brilliant but unseen, send them this video. Let them know they matter. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person saying, I see you. Before you go, I need to tell you something. The next story I'm sharing is about a woman everyone underestimated. A janitor who solved a problem that stumped an entire company's engineering team. What happened next exposed a truth about who we listen to and why. It'll make you question every assumption you've ever made about intelligence and credibility. You won't want to miss it. If stories like this mean something to you, if you're tired of empty content that wastes your time, stay with us. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I need the numbers, but because you deserve content that respects your intelligence and your time. We're building something different here. Something that values depth over distraction, truth over trends. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Caleb's story, for caring about people you've never met. That empathy, that willingness to see beyond your own experience, that's how the world changes. one story at a time, one person at a time. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep your eyes open. You never know who's standing on the other side of the fence, waiting to be seen.